Hi, I'm Jay, the managing editor here at University of Tampa Press. I'm here with Flower Conroy, our poet and recent publisher of Zoodikers of Bestiary, published yesterday, September 8th. We're so excited. We're also excited for this beautiful sculpture that Colin and Christine Poole created and allowed us to place on this cover that Flower is so excited about. Yeah, Flower, go ahead.
Yes, I love the cover. I'm so excited. Exactly what I always wanted the cover to look like. I found a picture of that sculpture years ago and I had it on my board and I was manifesting it. And when I won the award, I was like, I have to get that cover. And I was able to reach out to the artist thanks to my friend Scott Manning, who was able to trace it through the interweb because I couldn't find it. And they were just so generous, Christine and Colin, about sharing that artwork. And I couldn't be more thrilled or excited about it. I think it's stunning. It's so stunning.
That's amazing. Yes, it's a fired clay statue. They did the photography, and we feel it matches so well with Flower's book. And Flower, do you want to tell us a little bit about Zoodikers?
So it began actually many years ago. I started writing these prose poems, and they were more like elegies. So I had them written, and I didn't know what to do with them. They kind of just sat for a while, and then I did a couple different manuscripts, and then I finished my last one, and I was like, I need to figure out something. I'm like, you know what? Let me revisit those weird little animal poems. And I was looking at them. I'm like, I don't know quite what to do with the ones that I have. I said, but what if I try again? And I just started writing these little bestiaries, and I tried to keep it a little more simple with the title. And I just started accumulating them. And I let myself just kind of be as weird as I am on the page. And I tried not to be like, oh, what will people think of me? I'm like, you know what? These are for me. Let me see what happens. And I think that really helped free me to write things that I wouldn't have written otherwise.
Oh
So
my God.
I'm so excited about everything with the book.
And I totally agree. It's when we reach into those, I guess, what we sometimes feel like are like what other people think are weirdnesses. Our true core, our true truth, we're reaching that universal moment that's really connecting with others out there. I heard you say that these started as elegies. That's so interesting to me. How exactly did that work, and what was kind of like your thought process with that?
Yeah, so I just needed a form. And I was like, oh, if I do an elegy, so elegy to the seahorse or elegy to the giraffe, what happens then? And I guess part of that was me thinking about, extinction, not necessarily immediate with a giraffe because they're not extinct yet, but I mean, the way the climate's going and the world is going, I mean, it's something to think about. I mean, that's probably closer to being a reality than not, how everything's going. So I think that was part of the seed too. So when I just started writing them, I just kind of leaned into that a little bit more, and I think what was missing with the elegies is I didn't really have myself in them. So getting myself into it made it more real and personal.
Yeah. I really loved what you were saying there about thinking of these. It almost sounds like extinction poems. I feel like
Some of them, yeah, some of them are, and some of them that didn't make it into the collection did deal more with it. Like Tiger Wolf was one of the elegies, and that was published once by Menacing Hedge Journal, but it just didn't fit in this one, and I kind of stole some of it for another collection. So that happens too. I steal from myself, so I had to find new material, and I just was like, all right, well, what interests me? And I didn't want to limit it to just animals because the question of what is alive, isn't energy kind of life? So I let myself just be as weird as I wanted, and included whatever felt right, I guess.
I agree. As I was reading through, I think one of my favorite poems was Jackal. Let me actually find it really quick. Should have actually had it pulled. We were actually, if you remember, Flower, when we were going through the design for the book, that was one of the poems we had thought about including on the back cover if we were going to put a poem on the back. And
Right.
I felt like it was so just resonant with the themes that were being discussed and parsed within Zoodikers. Just to read off a few lines, like every day was the same, something to eat, don't get killed, try to outsmart the poison. Now a celebrity at this roadside zoo, they douse him with hose water, he laps from a tin bowl. When I fell from the roof and broke my fall with my wrist, I said I broke my wrist falling. To be haunted, one must only breathe. And those are just a few lines from Flower's poem Jackal from Zoodikers' Bestiary. But we see in each of these poems these threads that just tie together so hauntingly. And they each give these small snapshots of what we're going to find ahead in the collection, and also just resonating with what we remember from what we've previously read in these other poems. And Flower, if I may as well, I know we're a little bit partway into the conversation at this point, but I guess from your words, we have, of course, like the book description that readers will see when they pull up the product page to purchase your collection. But in your own words too, what is Zoodikers about, and how are you seeing it kind of tying into like the current landscape of poetry?
I don't know how it's going to tie in. I'm very excited to see how that ties in. I've been thinking about other books that it feels like it's in conversation with. But I wanted it to be its own unique little thing. I think it was ambitious because I didn't have any real ambitions for it. I just really wanted to write the poems, and that felt, I guess that is ambitious, just to write the poem. But, I wasn't thinking, oh my God, it has to, win a prize or anything like that. But now that it has materialized and it is what it is, I really do want it to speak to other poems and other collections, and I want it to be in a bigger conversation. And I do want to call attention to climate change and extinction, but there's also a lot about the personal in there too, and so I guess just trying to balance all of that. I don't think I answered the question though.
Oh no, I think that was perfect. One thing that stood out to me personally as someone who identifies as queer and gender fluid are the queer and gender fluid themes at play in Zoodikers. I was really happy that we were published, when I was first coming into this role and I knew this was the poetry prize winner that UT Press has chosen. I was so excited because I was like, oh my gosh, one of the first books I get to work on and help like typeset it and work with the author on this yourself is a very queer book. And for me personally, that was a great way of just seeing a representation in the world. And also just, I feel like, we're really just a community that's really trying to strive right now and really just putting ourselves forward and writing, as you were saying, these poems that are just getting at the heart of like what we're feeling. And that's not necessarily about winning a prize or anything like that, but just existing, like being, like showing up here. I think that relates a lot to these extinction poems and these poems about just living. Would you say?
Yeah, that was very important to me because in my earlier work, I shied from revealing too much about myself. I relied on the you so that it was ambiguous. Mm-hmm. And this is very much more open and out, and not that I was closeted, but when you're writing and you're newer to writing, you try to be a little more palatable or you don't want to be shut out, and in this collection I was like, I'm a lot older now and I've been in this relationship for over 20 years and this is it, and if you don't like it, you don't have to read the poems, but maybe you should if you don't like it, because maybe you'll find something like, oh okay, I get that now a little bit more.
So beautiful. I truly love that. And I heard you speaking about, you spoke about one of the poems that didn't make it into Zoodikers. Were there any others that you saw that you were kind of thinking about?
Yeah, there were quite a few that just didn't make it, but I was able to like steal little pieces that I liked because they were just failed. But I mean, there is, of course, in the back of my head, like, oh, well, you didn't do one for a pigeon. And that's like, I have a lot of personal connection to a pigeon. So like, maybe you do another Zoodikers, Zoo 2, because that also became a constraint with the collection, how when do you stop? It could be a million pages, you have to like figure out what is this actual body and how are the poems speaking to each other in this collection. And then in the next collection, what can you do differently? How, what other animals or objects can you bring in and what conversation can you make with that? Yeah, like rats. I don't have a rat poem. Why don't I have a rat poem? Yeah, just like, why don't I have certain poems in there?
Yeah,
So.
the thing that stood out to me about Zoodikers As you're familiar with, there's that type of poem that's called the list poem. And I'm sure there's a name for this, but I feel like in our poetry landscape, there have been books in the past, at least maybe like 5 years, that have been like list books. With like, of course, we're all aware of Amy Nezuko Mutatiel's World of Wonders and then her Bye Bye Bye. Rajiv Mahavir, a Guyanese poet, recently came out with Sea Beast, which also just goes through listing like different sea life. And so I guess leaning into that that structuring of like the listing of poems within these collections that are dealing with a certain theme or topic. To me, it's always seemed like a very great way of like teasing apart these hidden meanings that have to do more so with like the human experience. As with a list poem, we can see how through the naming of all of these objects, these nouns, we're really getting at these verbs, right? I feel like I've heard in the poetry community it said that every noun can become a verb, and you can make even the most abstract noun have a verb type of action stance to it. So we see a lot of activism almost with these books, and I know that was something core to like your writing of this as well, was just having that activism approach, that existing so fiercely and so authentically and truly that in parsing through these very specific topics, these very specific items of this list, to shape a container and understanding around those things. I guess what was kind of your thought process with that, like when you were going through? Yeah.
So with the prose poem, because I hadn't really explored it, so I had to figure out, all right, how to do it. So I've done free verse over several collections, and I'm like, all right, so in the prose poem, it can't just be a block. It has to still ring of a poem. So syntax was definitely a consideration. Rhythm and musicality was definitely a consideration. And I think this is a slant way to answer what you're saying about the activism and using the language purposefully to make poems out of the prose poems, because I didn't have the luxury of having N-words. So I would have to manipulate the syntax and because you helped me with the typesetting.
Oh.
If there was too much white space or blank space and it was aesthetically not in sync with the poem and what, causing certain words to not line up or making, N-words, I would have to massage the syntax so that it read well, but it also looked well on the page, because that was important to me. That became almost like, not resistance, but an act of, trying to push against something. So I was trying to push against the constraint that I put on myself.
And I think that's very central. It's a very central tenet to how we poets operate, with constantly moving against this kind of tension in the words that we're feeling, that we know we're right there on the tip of our tongue, but we're also seeking this way to interrogate at the same time, parallel with what we're writing about in those topics. And you actually spoke a little bit to your revision process there, which is super interesting with us poets, because we all do it in so many different ways. And did you see anything else kind of happening there as you were revising?
I had a workshop once, and I was told to take them out of prose form. And I was like, you know what? All right, I will. And I took the whole manuscript out of prose form and I put it into lines, and I used a shorter line than I usually use. And that really helped me like look at little units of the syntax and the sentence as like little parts of it, which really helped me when I put it back into the prose, because it really felt like it needed to be in prose. I almost began thinking of the prose poem as almost like a pen or an ink cage that the little beasts were in. And each poem, I also put a further space constraint. I would not let them go over one page, because I figured if I did that, I could just go on and on and on. And it's really important for me to keep it very tight, which is almost also speaking to, how precarious the world is. It's finite, it's small, our time is limited. So I was really trying to push those ideas subliminally into the form too.
Hmm. I really, it was as we were typesetting and going through the manuscript, I remember like when we were editing like the block structure and such, it was just it was so, like to see how the topics within were kind of converging upon themselves in the ways of like, uh, a bestiary. You picture all of these critters and all these animals that are on top of each other, and it's like you could feel all of this movement happening within that block frame. So it works so well within Zoodikers with putting forward just to show some of like how the poems are structured. We have fog and what is it, drone here, and with that box structure, those prose poems, um, it's so very much like I guess what we see when we're looking at, if we're speaking again about activism of activism in poetry or poetry and interrogating these different stances. Like it can seem so simple on the page, but then you get into it and there's so much within it. There's so much movement, so much fighting against each other and also working with each other. And you are in that movement yourself at that point. You become part of the poem.
Yeah, I think it allowed me to be very wild in the poem because you look at it and it looks like, oh, this is straightforward. I can just read this. And then you get in the poem and you're like, whoa, what is going on? And I
Yeah.
liked playing with that. That's fun for me. Like making syntax interesting, and it's not just interesting because it's got to be true. What can the sentence really be? What can this idea be? How can I push it to make it really embody what I'm feeling for it? So definitely trying to play with sound, play with word placement, and twerk that against that very nice, neat form was very useful for me, actually.
Yes, it was such a fun collection to read and so fun to go through each poem. I'm so honored to have had the chance to have moved through typesetting it and getting to work with you. And I actually wanted to ask if you might want to read one of your poems out loud.
Okay, all right. I'll read Lobster Shack. And since I'd already had birthday champagne when Cloris Leachman implored I recite to her poems in the smoky A&B bar, I, starstruck, made a bunch of drunk shit up about the moon, yes, the moon, as it was out the window, smearing its creamy shimmer over the water, licking the yacht's salty. Another, she sober demanded, but I was a sloshed swashbuckler who exhausted what new newness there might be to say about the moon spilling moon and more moon, and soon we were two ships, her raising her sails exitward, and I ferrying back to my party where I was missed, but only slightly. So I drifted. Found 9-year-old me following Loopy through the wet, cold walk-in cooler where crates of crustaceans awaited their plated fates. In exchange for driving to Maryland or Delaware, loading a truck with the ransacked, caught, Royd offered my father a bushel of Pauper's lobster, those Chesapeake blues. My parents fought, but not those nights. The kitchen rang with Old Bay, newspapers splayed, flies buzzing, nutcrackers cracking sooks, nut picks digging jimmies. Opening body, peeling the feathery cones of dead man. The ultimate prize, finding the poor man's caviar called coral in certain circles, boiled orange pearls that mash like moist nerds on my tongue. Didn't I fancy myself an Ariel slurping tamale, an Ursula among the sprawled shells, a little scuttlebutt queen flossing my teeth with a jagged, ragged, rubied claw?
Thank you so much. Could I actually have you read two more poems?
Absinthe makes the heart grow flaunter. Nothing I say isn't going to not sound like me. Doe's mother fawns, to fawn is to fall for, burn is what the bark does, but does stone eavesdrop hoar frost? To extract any adder, you must first decimate bloom. Elegiac lilies wake, angel grip. It's not like I have tomatoes on my eyes. It's not as if I wanted to plunge, leaning over bridge until hair flips, leg dangling into the uncanny. It wasn't even a what if, as much as it was a close ring nearing couldn't embody. I hesitate to say Fanta Morgana, but pull might be reciprocal between worlds, as if emptiness were magnetized beckoning. Like the clairaudience of glass, a third ghostly tune in the syntax, I unfold as to know my own downfalling. Bigfoot. You can green a thumb. At least I'm trying, pushing pennies into the dirt. Last warm season yielded basil and spades, a bucket of cucumbers, even one baby head of Citrullus vulgaris. This year, a bed of stalks, leaves ravished, the cilantro a lost cause, the summer squash yellow blooms that nevertheless floundered. Here, things, shadows mostly, flicker the peripheral. When in the bayou flooded backyard, I spied the mound I first thought it stranded turtle. It wasn't until it lowered, resurfaced, glided, then breached water that I recognized the alligator as the apex predator it was. That one afternoon, after the hurricane knocked the power out, and I was in a sports bra and shorts, my hands gloved and dirty from weeding, hair sweat matted, and two men entered the property. Perhaps it was the gravel crunching underfoot that made my skin prickle. No, I hadn't yet heard the boots casually advancing. They claimed they knew me. Truck broke down. I'd just moved in days earlier. I'd not laid eyes on them before. The etymological tendril of Sasquatch, Salish for wild men.
I just wanted to say that's one of my favorite poems in this collection, actually.
Really?
I read
Oh,
it,
thank you.
but no, I really loved that poem. And thank you again so much for those readings. And I guess to round off our interview, I was going to ask, to end on a playful note, what bestiary critter do you feel like right now? Especially whether you're in the forest, in your background.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to pick ones that aren't in the forest. Lately, walrus. And that's a found poem in the collection, but I love the absolute absurd, delightful logic of it. And rhinoceros for the backhanded humor in it, I think. That like subversive humor.
Yes. Wow, so great. Thank you again for meeting with me here today for this interview. We will also be publishing some of Flower's poems in our upcoming Tampa Review 70, issue 70, Herp Rate. It'll be about 4 poems, and we'll have like a feature of some of Flower's personal arts pieces from her Ephemeral Altars project. So you'll see some of those in there as well, and you'll be able to move through the poems a little bit more through a visual arts perspective in that way as well, to just have that experience. And before we leave today, Flower, did you have any last thoughts or anything else that you'd like to share with viewers?
I would just like to say that it has been such a pleasure working with you and the press. I mean, absolutely such a pleasure. And I recommend people submit because it really has been one of the best. So I want to thank you and everyone there, really.
Oh my gosh, thank you, Flowers. Well, we loved working with you, and we cannot wait to continue with it.